Episode 3. This episode is part of the Faith in the Nexus, Exploring Children's Spirituality series, and it explores how we nurture children's spirituality in today's world. We consider how adults can enable children to seek meaning from a place of confidence.
Welcome to our third podcast. Now, these podcasts have risen from the Faith in the Nexus investigation, how church schools facilitate opportunities for children to explore faith. Now, the conversations have developed out of the explorations we had around developing the animation, how we put the research, told the story of the research in the animation. We were looking at what are we actually talking about? What do these things actually mean? So in the first podcast, we looked at what do we mean by spirituality? We explored a little the value of the nexus and what did we understand by spirituality? What was underpinning the animation we developed there? In the second, we looked at the different approaches that various adults take to supporting children's spirituality, and we considered the benefits of the shoulder-to-shoulder approach. Now, this time, we're going to look at the spiritual needs of the child and how we can help each child to flourish. What do we mean by spiritual flourishing? Before that, we need to introduce ourselves. I'm Dr Ann Casson, Senior Research Fellow at the National Institute for Christian Education Research. And with me today are Nick.
I'm Nick Taunt. I was a head teacher for 18 years in a church comprehensive school in Chichester and now working with Accompanies Christchurch University.
And Kieran.
And I'm Kieran O'Brien. I'm the director of Ministory, and we're a storytelling agency which I've been working alongside Nexus, where we develop the animations. I do storytelling resources, but I'm also very much interested in spirituality.
If we start from the beginning and think, well, what do we mean by being spiritual? Everybody is a spiritual being. Nick?
Shall I just recap over those? That first statement, and everyone is a spiritual being, is a curious one, isn't it? Because we perhaps wouldn't always think that we knew what that meant. But in the sense, I think that we've been exploring that term spirituality, just as everyone is emotional. Everyone has a mind and is rational, not all the time, of course, but mostly rational. So we have a spirituality as well, and we've come to describe it in terms of what is inside us. That thing inside us, that spirituality inside us that gives us a sense of ourselves, of our identity, who we are and what we're here for. And that leads on to what's outside of us, our relationships. Now, our relationships actually start from inside, our relationship with ourselves. We do have a relationship with our past, curiously, and we feel perhaps a bit guilty about something we shouldn't have done in the past or haven't properly resolved. We think also about what sort of person we want to be in the future and what our aims and aspirations are. And we also think about ourselves now, and every now and then I certainly find myself saying sometimes, I don't really like myself very much today. And thinking through why it is that we might feel like that. We have a relationship with ourselves. And that spreads out, of course, into our relationship with our closest, our nearest and dearest, and then our friends, and our neighbours, and our relationship with our country, with our nation. Our relationship, increasingly, I think, we are more aware of our relationship with our world. And these are all aspects of our spirituality, and encapsulating all of that, our relationship with our God, which enables us to think through the most difficult questions of all. What happens to us when we die? Why have we been put here? What's our purpose? I think finally we reckon that our spirituality is something which is active and flexible. It keeps us on the move. we are constantly assimilating new experiences, a bit like finding new bits to a jigsaw and fitting them into the current bit of the jigsaw that we've already got, but also having to change that bit of a jigsaw so that the thing actually begins to make sense. We're constantly trying to make sense of us, of ourselves and of our world. And perhaps a picture of flourishing spirituality is where we feel comfortable with that jigsaw that we are putting together, and we feel at ease with ourselves as people. We can perhaps explore that a bit further as we go through this podcast.
I think that's really interesting. It's a really sort of positive idea, but I was aware, listening to people in the report, in the research, and certainly through, sometimes this spirituality gets stifled, doesn't it? It gets shut down, And the question then is, what is happening there? What is, where sort of, where is it going? Yeah, we're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's when we were doing lots of our research discussions, preparing the animation, and kind of really getting underneath the themes of the research. It's that message around first of all, as Nick has clearly said, it's wonderfully, it's spirituality, our need for purpose, meaning, belonging, how we relate to others. It's that kind of prior drive. And spirituality doesn't just belong to people who believe in God. That's another thing. We're back to that phrase, we are all spiritual. And we all have spiritual needs which get fulfilled either by ourselves intentionally, or it's regulated by our society, and that can lead to problems. So back to that question, what happens when spirituality gets stifled? We become selfish, our empathy fades, we become indifferent to the needs of others, and the world is all about us. This is the purpose. I'm here to get as much as I can out of life. Doesn't matter what happens to other people, and that's it. The end game of spirituality, where we haven't explored who are we, where we belong, what we're here for. So when it comes to in the animation, we were kind of struggled with this scene, and the scene was looking at what happens when we're not there to support children in the spirituality. And the first concept we had, and we kind of, when we're making these animations, we have lots of storyboards and lots of scribbles and drawings, trying to kind of get the concepts right. And one of the earlier concepts is, if we're not there with the child, does the door close on their spiritual life, and that door remains shut? And I think so what we came to, that's not the right image. That's not a helpful image, because that means that if you're not there with the spirituality no longer exists. You stop becoming a spiritual being. But that's not right. That's not helpful, really, if we think about it, because we continue to be spiritual beings. It's just that spirituality, that interiority gets neglected. And the way we handled it in the animation, whether it's right or not, and we might, if we came back to the project, we might come with different ideas, but we came to the conclusion that actually your spirituality, the inner world fades. It fades away, and you get caught up, and the image moved to the child on the phone, and lots of lines and everything around them, and they're getting caught up in this confusing and very complex world. And that interior life is just faded and forgotten about, to the detriment of the child.
I think it's a useful picture, that of colours fading, sort of colours draining out of the world. C.S. Lewis, in one of his books, I can't remember which one, has this picture of people getting to heaven, and when they step out of the bus, they had buses in heaven, onto the grass. Actually, the character says, "Oh, this hurts," and the grass is sharp and strong. And actually the whole world in this picture of heaven is more real, is more firm than what they've been used to in the earth. And the sense of heaven itself being more, having a greater realism than what we experience. And perhaps that's on that spectrum of what's real. the more our spirituality is stifled, the less real our perception of the world becomes, and the less curious we become. We stop asking questions about ourselves. And as Kieran, you were saying, we stop asking about other people and finding out about other people. And so our world becomes less real as a result.
I think that's really important. And I think that leads on to the question, we know it can be stifled, we know it can be challenged, but what keeps it going? What keeps it alive? What keeps, spirituality, or what enables spirituality to flourish? And I think you picked up the word there, Nick, that sense of curiosity, being spiritually curious. But then the big question comes, right? Well, what do we mean by being spiritually curious as just being curious about the world?
I know that in the research, Anne, you mentioned that children are very often the instigators of questions about God and about life, essentially spiritual questions. And spiritual curiosity is just about that, is maintaining those and asking those questions. And I think as a child, those questions are actually very delicate. They can easily be trampled on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They are questions which make a child feel a bit uncertain, possibly a little vulnerable.
But I think they're really important, because throughout the report, one of the first things that I came to as I was going through the research was the idea that it's children's instigating any conversation about faith in many of these homes. It was the child's questions that were sparking it. And children's questions, they might be simply a repeat of something that's happened in school today, but often it's one of the children's subjects really quite interesting. He's talking about RE, and he says, I need to go home and rethink it. And it's that idea of rethinking what's done. Those big questions about God that we've done today. I need to rethink them. And I think often that's what children do. They rethink, and then comes the questions. And it's how we answer those questions, which I think we're coming on to a moment, is really interesting. But it's not just questions that the children were initiated. They told me about reflection. They told me masses about reflection, which you can find in the report. But it wasn't somebody told them to reflect. It's often at home. They came up with the ideas of reflection. They found a space in the garden, a space in the park, or a walk along the beach. I had quite a few telling me about walks in woods. I think that's quite a powerful image, when they started thinking about things and they were reflecting. And this curiosity that a child has that's naturally there, then it gets, how do we keep that flourishing? How do we keep that curiosity and those questions going? Kieran?
Yeah, and it's and sometimes as a parent, I feel accidentally, not intentionally, accidentally, we can kind of squash curiosity by giving children the answers. Well, the answer to that is the X. That's the answer. And actually, so when it comes to spirituality, and the word you use there, and it's a really powerful word, is wandering.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the contemplative mind. We need to contemplate these questions. What does that mean? Well, contemplation isn't just it's in answer to your question. If you look at paragraph 3, section 2, you'll find it in this book. That's not a meaningful answer. And so growing up as a Catholic, in previous generations, you had a penny catechism, which had all the answers to life, which all very is all there. You didn't need to think for yourself, because the answers were given to you. It's actually that's not really helpful when it comes to growing your spirituality. It's to wonder and to question and to rethink questions. So as parents, the challenge is not to jump in with an answer and get out of the situation as quickly as possible, is to be spiritually curious with our children. And that's tough, because as parents, you want to be there to give the answers. You want to be the answer person, and and help them move on to the next stage. But when it comes to spirituality, it's always about going deeper. The deeper questions are more important than the answer.
Yes, it strikes me very often with Jesus's stories that actually when he's asked a question, who is my neighbor? He answers with a story and then asks the question at the end of it, okay, well, which one of these was my neighbor? Which one was more neighborly? And that way I think of, we were talking on a previous podcast about going shoulder to shoulder, walking alongside our child, asking these questions, and sharing questions, sharing the child's question with your own question. What if we thought about it like this? Or even to say I don't know the answer to that. I wonder if we could think about it in this way. I think our certainty and our dogmatism with our children is damaging, in the sense, as you say, Kieran, of squashing. And it also gives the impression to a child that there are actually simple answers to questions which fundamentally are very serious and complicated questions. And I'd love that phrase, rethinking, because that's exactly what's happening with the jigsaw puzzle. Mm-hmm. This piece doesn't fit into my jigsaw puzzle at present. Things have got to change. So I've got to, in a kind of miraculous way, that these things work imaginatively, the jigsaw puzzle changes so I can fit the new piece into it. And the language then of uncertainty and of questions helps us to be standing alongside and exploring with our child rather than talking to them.
I think that's really interesting. A couple of the parents, when they were sharing with me about these conversations that they'd had with the children, were talking not about how they'd help the child, but how it helped them, the benefits to them of, I've never thought about it in that way. It made me think differently. And I think the opportunities with these conversations that you can have when you explore with, as we say, with the child, it's fascinating for both. It's that co-creation. It's not, we're just doing this for the child, but it's actually when the child asks a question like that, I've never thought of that before. What do I think about that? And explore it with them. I think that's really important. Yes.
And teachers, as teachers, we talk about co-creation because we recognize that actually we, in learning, we have to start with the child. Mm-hmm. We have to know what a child knows first, whether they've got the foundations of this mathematical formula or whatever, before we can progress from there. And we have to keep talking with children in a classroom in order to make sure that we are working together. The whole language of metacognition in educational circles is a very important language, because it's about helping children to learn how they learn, so that a child might say, well, actually, I'm much better working with pictures than with words. I can picture this better than if I just use words. So can I actually do a mind map rather than write a paragraph? And a teacher might say, well, yeah, if that helps you to think better, let's do it like that. And likewise with our spiritual development, we need to help children to be exploring how they think and how they feel spiritually. That's to say, to give real recognition to the questions that they're asking, first of all.
Yes, yeah.
To say, these are important questions. Mm-hmm. And to recognize that very often there is a even more serious question behind the first question that's asked. So a child comes up to mummy and said, and says, is it right that everyone should be kind to everyone else? If the answer is, well, yes, of course, now sit down and have your supper. Actually, the question behind that question is, well, someone was very unkind to me today, or I saw someone bullying someone else. And that whole area gets missed if the adult's response to the first simpler question doesn't actually ask another question to delve into that more complicated one behind.
And I think that leads us back to where we were beginning about talking about it being stifled. It's that, you know, we want spirituality to flourish and avoid that stifling. And it's then, how do we help it flourish? At least deeper, you know, what do we mean by a flourishing spirituality? What, you know, we're saying everybody's a spiritual being, and being spiritual is a good thing. We want this spiritual curiosity, but what do we mean by a spiritual flourishing? What is spiritual flourishing?
It's quite a hard question to answer.
No, I don't ask the easy ones, Kieran.
That's easy questions. I think it's a hard one. But
you've got 1 minute.
Yeah. But spiritual flourishing, I mean, we know kind of broadly what it means. It's when we have a strong foundation of who we are, a sense of self, a sense of belonging, a sense of who I am in God and who God is in me. I'm not looking for external answers to those questions. I can find those answers within. That's a strong foundation that enables spiritual flourishing. So before we kind of unpack spiritual flourishing more, I just want to have a more of a deeper question lead us up to that, is the journey of getting children to that place of spiritual flourishing. It's when we're not talking to them, we're talking with them. We're helping them to see with new eyes. And as Nick says, it's the thinking about thinking. It's thinking about the deeper questions underneath. So when we speak about In The Nexus, home, schools and church work together with children at the centre, with a shoulder-to-shoulder capacity, it's a real shift in how we approach children's spirituality, to stand shoulder to shoulder. It's not to give answers. It's not join this group or this group will solve everything. It's really about helping them to see deeper, helping them to remain spiritually curious. And someone once said something about seek and you shall find. How do we remain seekers for the rest of our life, rather than thinking that we've found it, we don't need to seek any further. So it's almost like, if you want to create spiritual flourishing, it's not something you get to, it's something that awakens within you and awakens alongside others who are spiritually curious. And it's amazing when you're sat in a room talking about faith with people who are spiritually curious, who know they don't have all the answers, know there's something just beyond, and you know they don't need the answers. It's something they want to get to. It's actually they can they help each other to grow in their faith. They grow in the depth of their spirituality. So so the foundation, I think, for children's spirituality to help spiritual flourishing is as simple as just keep them curious. That's, you know, if we could just do that one thing, we can help them grow. Set a foundation which they'll strengthen when they grow later in life. If they can keep that curiosity, that seeking, so that they know they don't know, but they know there's more, just a little bit further, just to keep that energy going. I think we will help them enormously later on in life.
One of the questions which I think arises from that, a question that as parents, as teachers, as clergy, can ask our children is the question, how does that make you feel? How does this idea make you feel? So a child has asked a question about, perhaps about bullying and about kindness, and to ask back, having explored it, you know, why are you asking the question, or has something happened today, and so on. But by the end, to be asking the question, well, how does that make you feel? Talking about it in this way, does that make you feel, you know, comfortable? does that to an older child, you might say, well, do you feel satisfied with what we've said, or do you think there's something more? But constantly going back to the child, this is the kind of the metacognitive bit of it. Constantly going back and saying, well, does that help you to fit things together in a coherent way? Does that help you to feel confident in yourself and more comfortable in your view of things?
I think that's really important, Nick. And I think you're thinking, how often do you do that? How often do we do that in the home? But how often do we do that as teachers in a school, or even, in the church? When you're, and this comes back to the images we try to use in the animation as we were developing, where, we put the child at the center, but are things happening? I think we had quite a deep conversation. Are things happening down to the child or with the child, and how do you sense that? Because what's coming across through our conversations, through all these podcasts and before, as we're developing the animation, that it's got to be with the child. That, there is not a spirituality out there that you can package up and give to the child, push down, but it's exploring with, and it's that language that you were picking up, Nick, of using that sort of, what do you think? How has this helped you? And leading on a proper dialogical conversation with the child, rather than, here's a child asking a question, here's me giving an answer, without checking, does that answer fit? Go back to your jigsaw image. Yeah, I think.
And a what's the impact of that kind of dialogue? Well, the impact might be in encouraging me to take action in some way. Kieran talked about there are no definite answers. It's always just beyond the horizon. Yeah. Well, yes, of course, because that's what faith is. There isn't any absolute certainty, but the faith it seems to me, is there to encourage you to try it out. And you'll only try something out. Love your enemy. You'll only try that out if you feel confident enough to do so, confident enough to step out in faith and actually do that. Talk to your enemy, or be nice to someone who's upset you, and you suddenly discover, actually, here's a person who I hadn't really recognized. I didn't realize they were already hurt inside themselves, and that's why they'd been unpleasant to me, and the whole world opens up in front of you.
And I think you've picked up there a really important idea, that confidence to remain curious, that confidence of the child to keep asking questions, confident that in the response they will get. And I think that's really important. It comes again throughout the report, throughout the research. How do we give parents confidence, or adults in any setting, home, church or school, confidence to explore with the child, which then gives the child confidence to keep asking these questions and to keep the spirit of curiosity. Nick?
I think that confidence is one of the key aspects of a kind of spiritual resilience.
Yeah.
That word resilience, I love it. It means to bounce back, or at least to be able to bounce back. I mean, literally, the Latin word is to bounce. And a lot's been written about resilience of late, very usefully, I think. But the sense in school, the bouncing back is not getting flustered when you come across a question in an exam that you can't do. Quite a number of years ago, a chap called Guy Claxton, he's still an educational academic, did an experiment with children taking a maths exam, a maths test, 10 questions, and they were increasingly difficult. First question was very easy, question number 10 was very difficult, but he swapped questions 8 and 5. so that actually you went 1, 2, 3, 4, and then question 5, which should have been only a little bit more difficult than question 4, turned out to be question 8, which was a lot more difficult. And what did children do? Well, some children coming to question 5, which was actually the third most difficult question of the 10, said, I can't do this, and got so flustered that they couldn't do any of the other questions either afterwards. And some children said, oh, I can't do that one, blew that. I'm going on to question number 6. And they carried on. And then they found, of course, when they went back, they could do number 8. But that second child was the child with the resilience to say, I don't know how to do this, but I know what to do. I'll go on and see if I can do the other questions. Whereas the first child had said, I don't know what to do, and I can't do any of it. I give up. And resilience is, in spiritual terms, it's coming to those questions where you really don't know the answer. And you're not satisfied with what people are saying. But you trust that actually, and this is the faith bit, you trust that there is going to be an answer at some point. And you will carry on in spite of the fact that it's proving to be very difficult. Carol Dweck talks about growth mindset. Again, teachers will know all about that. And Anne Maston, a Canadian professor who's written a lot about resilience and is a leading expert on resilience in children, particularly following trauma, talks about resilience as being an ordinary magic. It's magical in that it's children can overcome extraordinary trauma, but it's also ordinary in the sense that it's everyday and that everyone has it. And I think spirituality is a bit like that. It's a bit like ordinary magic, and we can feed it and nurture it to become stronger and stronger.
And I think that's the underlying thing, isn't it? That you need that resilience, that sort of to be there, because life's not easy, and you know that in the future that there are going to be times when things are going to be challenging, and when that jigsaw puzzle certainly doesn't fit at all together, and you need that resilience. And how we develop that and how we can identify when that's there, when that flourishing is there, becomes really important. Kieran.
Yeah, and the word resilience, we can unpack this all day, what it really means, and spirituality and how they relate to each other. But it comes back to when you have a sense of meaning and purpose, spirituality, that's inner drive for making sense of the world, where I belong, gives depth to the world. And when we don't have that depth, those colours, this colourful world, everything belongs, everything makes sense. I know my place in the world. When we don't have that, we're back to what can the world give to me? Or what do I get out of it? And then when we have that kind of mindset, that attitude, we lose our resilience. So if, let's say it comes to relationships, if this relationship's not giving me anything, I'm just going to give up on it. If I'm not happy, I'm going to give up on that, and I'm just going to keep moving on until I find happiness. And that's, it's almost the consumer mindset. Happiness is over there. That deep sense of inadequacy. I'm not loved enough. I'm not good enough. Happiness be over there once I get something else. What spirituality shows us, by contrast, is happiness is not over there. It's right here, right now. And it's our acceptance and our willingness to be where we are, knowing that where we are is the place where we're supposed to be, and the relationships we have are the relationships we're supposed to have, and we create meaning out of those relationships, out of the world we live in. That's where we have that inner resilience. So when big things come along, the difficulties in life, stress and strains, whether it's about money or whether it's loss of loved ones, is that you have a foundation from which you can draw from. For those who have neglected their inner spiritual world, who don't believe in it, don't believe that they need a purpose, is that those worlds can fall apart pretty quickly. So the work we're doing with children at this stage even though it feels really light touch, it doesn't feel that important. You know, it's much important that they brush up on their math skills and their English literacy. That's much more important. The other stuff, you know, it's you know, the nice to haves. Actually, it's the other way around. So it's when we focus on the importance of spirituality in order for children to understand their meaning and place in the world, sets them up for being stronger. So it's more resilient learners, more resilience in their spirituality, and also in relationships with others. So, you know, it's you know, just to re-emphasize that this work that is happening with the Nexus, it's really, really important. We can't understate it enough.
I think, sorry, Nick, you go.
Sorry, and I wonder if it's worth pointing out that I think the most vulnerable point that children find themselves at is as they move from primary to secondary school.
Yeah.
It's the age 11 to 12 as children are becoming much more independent. They are seeing themselves as separate from their parents. They are working out their own relationships. All the issues which are at the center of spirituality. If the language of faith that they've learned up to that point of move from primary to secondary school, is all in a childish form and is presented as these are the answers in a simple way, then very quickly children will look back and say, well, that's not relevant to me.
Mhm.
That's nothing to do with how my life is now. So whereas, as Kieran's saying, if we can take that approach of asking questions back to children, of sharing the issues, of asking, well, how does that idea make you feel? Does that help? That sense that there's a constant growing of the jigsaw. It's not fixed and settled and you take it or leave it. It's something that is developing all the time as we are growing up, for goodness sake. My jigsaw's still not quite big enough, but we're still doing it, and we're still learning, and that's why the foundations at the primary stage with our children is so crucial, so that we don't close off the avenues to further discussion and exploration.
And I think that's really important, Nick, that sense of it's got to be growing, it's got to be changing. You talk to many year 5 and 6, like 10 and 11-year-olds, and they are worldly wise beyond their years. And if they think it's childish, they will think, that's not for me. You know, I've spoken to them about Bible stories in one school where the Bible in the school were beautiful picture books, children's picture Bibles. And by the time they're 10 and 11, they think, well, you know, the Bible's nothing to do. That's kiddies' stories. That's for little ones. And it's that question that spirituality, faith needs to grow as the child grows, which links back, Kieran, to that image that we reworked so many times at the end of the animation, that how do we show that it's continually growing? It's not something that you can give them this foundation and then that's set. It's not something set in stone. We needed a different image really to work that through.
Yeah, and so in the animation, we have that lovely image at the end with the leaves, everything moving around, and spiritual flourishing, set the foundation for the child. But the last scene is a child now stepping out. They have the foundation and they're prepared for what the world throws at them. Well, almost. So it gives them that strong foundation. So that's a really important kind of ambition, I think, what the Nexus is trying to do. It's not just about looking at the spiritual needs of the child here and now. It's about setting foundations for what happens next. And as Nick says, that stage of going from primary to secondary. I have a daughter who's at that stage, and you can see it. You know, it's the change in her attitude. Where everything was about the family. You know, it's about parents. She now has almost her own little life now. She's kind of moving off into her own independence, which is great to see. And as a parent, it's quite heartbreaking, because you want things to remain as they are when they're quite acute and dependent on you. But actually, they need to leave. They need to leave that security to find their own way. And as parents, how can we stand alongside them and help them to point, the compass in the right direction, and walk along them on that adventure of so how do we connect all the dots? Because the other question which we struggled with is all this talk about spirituality. And spirituality, if we look in a kind of common parlor, it's a very common phrase. People use it in so many different ways. Oh, then what is Christian spirituality? Is that different? Is that the same? How do we reconcile Christian spirituality? Is it different to other spiritualities? And we had lots of kind of to and fro on really embedding this down. And I was really surprised when I saw research from America where it showed an increasing number of people who felt that they were religious, declining people religious and now saw themselves, sorry, done all wrong. So I was surprised by this research in America, which showed it's the decline in people who saw themselves as religious, but the increase in number of people who saw themselves as spiritual. But I was really interested in a subsection of that research, which showed people who saw themselves as religious but not spiritual. So, well, how does that make sense? How can you be religious but not spiritual? And I think the word spirituality has almost become contentious, and we might be afraid of it as Christians. It feels like it's the opposite of what Christianity is. So I don't know what your thoughts are. How do you reconcile the modern understanding of spirituality and what we mean by Christian? Are they separate, or are they intertwined, the same thing?
Nick, were you going to jump in there?
Yes. It seems to me the difference between spiritual and religious may be defined in terms of religious being adhering to an absolutely set and absolute dogma. That's acceptance, whereas spiritual is something more flexible and alive and active. In James's letter in the New Testament says you can't have faith without action. And although there's contention around that, you can see the point that actually faith, by its nature, involves action. Faith isn't simply accepting something. Faith is doing something as a result of. I can accept that the bus is going to come in 5 minutes' time, but unless I actually go to the bus stop in 4 minutes' time, because I'm trusting that it will arrive on time in 5 minutes, I might miss it, or I won't get to where I want to go. Our lives are dominated by examples of trust, simple, mundane ones like that. And in our spiritual lives, our spiritual life is likewise one of trust. And trust in what? Or trust in whom? Well, trust in Jesus as the one who died for us, and who is our Saviour and Redeemer. And that has an impact on everyday life as well, in being active. And we've not got all the answers. So my views have to be flexible as well. But essentially, there is a trust in a person who I believe was here as a man, but is also God. And that just sustains me.
Yeah. And I think when we look at from the research in the children's talk, and we're talking to children in church schools, and they centre the spirituality within a Christian story. And that story, we're back to almost where we're beginning, that storytelling aspect, isn't it? That it's a spirituality expressed within the Christian framework, within the Christian tradition, and expressed through stories, through narratives. We've all got a narrative, and we all make up our own narrative. And it's those bits and pieces of the Christian story that contribute to the developing and the flourishing of children's spirituality. And Kieran, sorry.
Well, so, as a storyteller, so I probably do have quite a lot to say on on this topic. So it's, and just to reiterate, so when we talk about storytelling and Christianity, obviously there are the stories within the Christian stories, which we gather each Sunday or more regularly to tell again and again, and we listen to those stories not with the analytical, what does that mean? What's the outcome of that story? That means this. So obviously he's trying to say this, and no, we listen with the heart, and that's not just a romantic kind of gesture. It's to kind of contemplate the meaning behind the stories, to keep going deeper. Even though we read the same stories again and again, something new happens, something creative happens every time we listen to those stories. But then there's also the bigger story, the main story of Christianity. And so this is the one we kind of fill in ourselves, theologically and personally, who Jesus is, who is he to me, and how do I find meaning to the world I belong to, through this story. And this story can be really helpful in helping to shape how we see the world. We see the world through the story. But also sometimes that story can be negative. If it's so focused on yourself or organization or looking inwards, not looking inwards, just about you. It can be it's a nationalistic kind of perspective of Christianity. It's not really a Christianity that includes everyone, that looks out. It's just about us in our group, our way of seeing the world. So storytelling becomes a really interesting way of how do we help children, how do we help ourselves to see the world as it is through a storytelling narrative. I can go on a little bit longer about that, but the important thing is when we're telling stories to children, we are reframing how they see the world. Mm-hmm. We're setting a frame of who God is and how we relate to God through the stories. We don't do religion through kind of bullet points. These are the 5 key things you need to know as a Christian. We do it through storytelling. And the reason why we do that is because storytelling leads us to a deeper truth, which isn't just about answers, it's about relations.
And I think there's a lot in there. And I think that's a whole new conversation, isn't it? Storytelling in Christianity. And I think it's almost time to draw to a close here now. Is there anything else, Nikki, we're going to add just there?
No, I'm really looking forward to the next podcast talking about storytelling and how, particularly how stories develop in our minds as we grow from being children, as we grow up through adolescence into adulthood. The same stories are there, but they take on different colours and different significances, I think, as we grow. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, and it's how we put ourselves, where do we put ourselves in the stories? As we grow, the stories stay the same. So I think we'll draw this one to a close and say thank you very much to our guests, to Nick and to Kieran. And I do hope you've enjoyed listening to our conversations about the faith, how we explored Faith in the Nexus report through an animation, and the deep conversations we had about children's spirituality. Thank you very much.